because it just means so much to him what he does. He loves to perform.
The morning Ozzy Osbourne died, something shattered deep inside millions of people. Not just shock, it was as if the silence screamed louder than any amplifier he ever touched. For over 5 decades, he wasn't just another voice in music. He was the howl that pulled us out of our darkness. At 76, the Prince of Darkness took his final bow. No encore, no spotlight, only a crushing silence that fell heavy on broken hearts. People didn't just mourn a singer, they mourned the one man whose voice made their pain feel less lonely. A generation felt its soul crack open. This grief wasn't fanfare, it was personal, like losing someone you truly loved. But no heart broke more than Sharon's. She wasn't just his wife, she was the one who stood in the fire beside him, who carried him through storms when his own legs gave out. Her grief wasn't for the man on stage, it was for the man who once held her hand in the dark and promised he'd never let go. So before anything else, take a moment, lift a thumb, a silent salute to the one who screamed through silence. Because in rock's violent, beautiful chaos, no voice ever roared from deeper pain than Ozzy Osbourne's. And yet, beneath every scream was a quiet heartbreak. The world misunderstood him for so long. They thought he was trying to shock them, but he wasn't. He was trying to stay alive. He was never meant to make it. Born into poverty in Birmingham, locked up before he turned 18, dismissed by the industry as a joke, Ozzy didn't rise. He clawed his way up, bleeding and bruised, with nothing but raw instinct. He didn't have training. He didn't look the part. Didn't act like a polished rock idol either. But he had something they couldn't teach: presence. When he stepped on stage with Black Sabbath in the early 70s, it was as if pain itself grabbed the mic. People didn't just listen, they felt him, because he was real, dangerously real. He once said, "I sang because I didn't know what else to do. I had to scream to stay alive." That wasn't poetry, that was survival. When news broke that Ozzy Osbourne had passed away, it didn't feel like just another headline. It felt like something in the universe cracked. A jolt that hit harder than any amplifier he'd ever cranked to 11. For over 50 years, he wasn't just a performer. He was the primal scream that gave voice to generations struggling to find their own. At 76, the Prince of Darkness took his final bow. But instead of cheers, there was only silence. A silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing down on millions of hearts at once. Fans didn't just lose an artist that day, they lost the man who helped them feel seen when their lives fell apart. He wasn't a star to them, he was a lifeline. The pain wasn't just public, it was personal. A collective heartbreak that felt like mourning a family member. But for one woman, that grief cut deeper than words can reach. For Sharon, it was more than losing a husband. She lost the soul she'd fought beside, the man she had held through collapse and chaos. She wasn't just the wife of a rock legend. She was the fire that kept him burning, and now she was the one left in the dark. Her pain wasn't for the icon on stage, but for the man who once gripped her hand in the blackest hours and whispered promises that only lovers understand. Before we go any further, let's pause. Let's raise a silent tribute, a thumb, a nod, a breath, for the man who screamed his way through the shadows so that others wouldn't feel alone in theirs. Because in the brutal, beautiful chaos of rock history, no voice ever tore through the void quite like Ozzy's. And behind that thunderous growl, there was always something aching, something fragile, something the world rarely recognized in time. The truth is, Ozzy Osbourne was never trying to shock us. He wasn't chasing headlines or attention. He was trying to survive. From the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. He came from poverty in Birmingham, a world of soot-stained walls and empty cupboards. He was arrested by 17 and dismissed by the industry as too rough, too raw, too wild. His rise wasn't some golden ascent. It was a desperate, bloodied climb, nails dug in, fists swinging, lungs screaming. He had no training, no polished image. He didn't move like a star, didn't care to behave like one. But what he had couldn't be taught. He had presence, he had pain, and he knew how to bleed it into a microphone. When he took the stage with Black Sabbath in the early 70s, it was like someone gave agony a voice. You didn't just hear him, you felt him. Every lyric, every howl, it was real, brutally, dangerously real. He once said, "I sang because I didn't know what else to do. I had to scream to stay alive." That wasn't a metaphor dressed as poetry. It was a survival tactic carved out of desperation. His performances weren't polished routines. They were raw, unpredictable, and unfiltered, like someone cracking open their chest and letting the storm pour out. Those chaotic nights on stage weren't about spectacle. They were confessions. They were breakdowns turned into music. They were the sound of a man trying to exorcise his own demons in real time. The infamous moment in 1982, the Bat, wasn't theater. It wasn't scripted. It was Ozzy in his truest form, impulsive, wild, surreal. And right after that bite, with blood on his chin and shock rippling through the crowd, he didn't flinch. He didn't leave. He sang. Because for him, the stage wasn't a platform for applause. It was his refuge. It was the one place where pain became purpose. He kept performing, through injuries, through addiction, through a depression that nearly crushed him. There were nights he collapsed after the show, not during. Nights when even walking felt like war, but he refused to stop, even after undergoing spinal surgeries. Even as Parkinson's slowly stole his movement, someone once asked why he kept going, why he didn't just rest. And he whispered, "I owe it to them." And he meant it. Every word. He wasn't just singing for the fans. He was surviving with them, side by side, note by broken note. In his 40s, when his body had been pushed to the edge, alcohol poisoning, overdoses, nights where death felt inches away, he didn't disappear. He returned. But he wasn't just the Prince of Darkness anymore. He became something more. He became the man who crawled out of it. His solo journey didn't fade into the shadow of Black Sabbath. It ignited with even more intensity. Through the 90s, he tore through the charts with tracks like No More Tears, an anthem soaked in pain, power, and clarity. Then came Ozzfest in 1996. Not just a festival, but a haven. A stage where outcasts and misfits saw themselves reflected in the chaos and catharsis he offered. To those who felt broken, forgotten, or lost, Ozzy created a world where that brokenness became something sacred, something loud, something proud. By the early 2000s, through the wild success of the Osbournes reality show, the world finally got a look behind the madness. What they saw wasn't a monster. They saw a man, flawed, forgetful, hilarious, tender. A man who fumbled lyrics but never forgot what pain felt like. A man who mocked himself but never mocked those who looked up to him. Time eventually cracked his voice, but what poured through the cracks was even more powerful. A soul that roared louder than ever. Raw, worn, but still defiantly alive. "I'm not a role model," he once admitted. "I'm a warning." But he wasn't just that, he was both. He was the scar and the healing, the wreckage and the resurrection. Night after night, he left pieces of himself on the stage until there was almost nothing left to give. But he gave anyway. That, perhaps, is the most devastating truth of all. He emptied himself for us, until even the screams ran out. And now as we look back, every growl, every stumble, every trembling note, none of it was just performance. They were cries for connection. They were desperate prayers. They were silent promises whispered into the void. That even if you're drowning, even if you feel broken beyond repair, you still matter. You still belong. You are still worthy of being heard. That's what made Ozzy timeless. He didn't just sing over the noise. He became the voice for everyone who thought they were too far gone to speak. And in doing so, he created something that no award, no headline, no label could manufacture. He became truth. It is cruel, almost unbearable to accept that such a voice has finally gone quiet. But in that deafening silence, we remember something deeper. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just battle darkness. He taught millions how to walk through it and come out louder than before. In the final years of his life, as the lights faded and the once mighty growl softened into a whisper, we witnessed a transformation more powerful than any encore. These weren't just the closing acts of a rock star. They were the last chapters of a man who had poured every ounce of his soul into his art, his agony, and the people who saw themselves in his storm. By the time he reached his early 70s, Ozzy's body had turned into a battlefield. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2003, but kept it hidden until 2020. All the while, the disease crept through him slowly and mercilessly. Each step became heavier. Each breath felt like a task. He went through multiple surgeries on his spine. He wrestled with nerve pain that never let up. More than once, he collapsed backstage after pushing through a show. But he kept returning, not because of contracts or commitments, but because he believed the people who stood by him deserved everything he had left. He never forgot them, not for a moment. His final act of defiance wasn't a sold-out arena or a hit single. It was something quieter, more intimate, a willingness to show the world what vulnerability really looked like. In those last months, Ozzy released Patient Number 9. It wasn't born from ambition. It came from a place of urgency, like he was singing against the silence that waited just beyond the music. Every line in that album sounded like a goodbye. Every note held the weight of a man fighting to be remembered. In one interview, he said, "I'm not afraid to die. I'm more afraid of being forgotten." By then, he could barely stand. Friends and producers spoke of moments in the studio when he had to sing while seated, clutching the microphone stand as if it were holding him up. There were times he couldn't finish a song without breaking down. A producer recalled how tears would come mid-take. But even then, Ozzy kept singing. Because for him, music was never just performance. It was survival. It was the only way he knew how to breathe. On July 5th, he made one final appearance on stage, this time at a festival in Birmingham, the city where everything began. He didn't perform. He couldn't. But he stood there, trembling but unbowed, gazing out over a sea of people shouting his name. His eyes were glassy with tears. They said everything his voice no longer could. "Thank you, I'm still here." That moment wasn't a concert. It was a farewell disguised as a wave. To Ozzy, that gesture meant more than anyone could understand. It was a final wish fulfilled, one he had quietly carried throughout his decline. To stand before the people who never left him, look them in the eye, and say goodbye in his own way. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about legacy. It was about love. It was about gratitude. He gave them everything, even when his body had nothing left to give. When he returned home that night, emotionally drained but at peace, he told Jack, "I did what I needed to do." There was no regret in his voice, only a sense of closure. For a man whose life had been chaos, that stillness, that moment, was his calm. He had given his fans everything, and they, in turn, had carried him to the end. In private, the struggle became even more unbearable. Ozzy confided in Sharon that at times he felt like a ghost inside his own body, trapped in a form that no longer answered to him, watching the world spin while he stood still. But still, every morning, he found something, no matter how small, to push himself forward. Sometimes it was a fan letter. Sometimes it was a melody that had visited him in a dream. Sometimes it was the sound of Kelly's laughter drifting in from the hallway. Ozzy never sugarcoated who he had been. In those final interviews, he spoke without filters, about regrets, about the people he had let down, about the years lost to addiction, about the father he had failed to be. "I wasn't always good," he admitted, "but I always tried to come back better." And he did, again and again, until his body simply couldn't keep up with his will anymore. As the days shortened and the hospital visits grew longer, his family gathered close and stayed. Jack, Kelly, and Amy took turns reading letters from fans, some who said his music had pulled them back from the edge, others who simply thanked him for being real. Sharon never left his side. She was there every night, and her voice was the last sound he heard before falling asleep. A whisper meant for him alone, words only they understood. There is a kind of grief that no language can reach, a heartbreak that drowns sound itself. When Ozzy Osbourne left this world, it wasn't just the passing of a rock legend. It was the extinguishing of a fire that had kept millions warm in their darkest nights. His pain had become comfort for others. His brokenness gave people permission to feel whole again. And though his body faded into silence, The echo of his life kept roaring. It roared in every metal riff, in every misfit screaming lyrics alone in their bedroom, in every person who decided to rise one more time when giving up felt easier. That is Ozzy's legacy, the soul that refused to go quietly, the heart that kept screaming long after the song had ended. When the news broke, it didn't move like any ordinary headline. It didn't fade in the noise of daily news. It moved like an earthquake, a silent tremor that ran through everyone who had ever screamed his name from a stadium or whispered his lyrics through tears behind a closed door. Ozzy Osbourne was gone, and the world didn't react with silence. It answered with a roar, a tidal wave of sorrow, gratitude, and reverence that crossed borders, languages, and generations. In Birmingham, where it all began, fans came together beneath a towering mural of Ozzy and Digbeth. They left black roses, vinyl records, handwritten letters stained with rain. Some lit candles, others brought speakers and played Sabbath songs into the night. It wasn't loud like a concert. It was solemn, aching, reverent. One note taped to the wall read only 7 words. "You taught me how to survive." Across the ocean in Los Angeles, crowds formed at his Hollywood Walk of Fame star. People knelt down, some dressed in full metal gear, others in business suits. They all came for the same reason. A man held a ticket stub from a 1982 concert, creased and worn. A woman clutched a framed photo of herself and Ozzy at a record signing. Through quiet tears, she whispered, "He saw me. He really saw me." From Sao Paulo to Stockholm, radio stations paused regular programming. They played nothing but Ozzy. His voice, raw, defiant, eternal, filled the airwaves for hours. Streaming services reported an explosion in traffic. Spotify and Apple Music showed a surge of more than 900% in just half a day. Songs like War Pigs, Dreamer, No More Tears stopped being tracks. They became tributes. They became eulogies. Final goodbyes in musical form. Old live footage resurfaced on YouTube. A 1983 performance of Bark at the Moon started trending worldwide. So did a 1992 interview, where Ozzy said, "I've made mistakes, but music always saved me." Tens of thousands of fans filled the comments section. Some relived memories. Others confessed how Ozzy's voice pulled them through breakups, overdoses, and suicidal nights. One man wrote, "Ozzy didn't just talk about the darkness. He lived there and showed the rest of us how to get out." On social media, his remembrance became a digital tapestry. The hashtag #ThankYouOzzy trended in over 50 countries. Artists from every corner of music, metal, pop, hip-hop, paid their respects. James Hetfield from Metallica called Ozzy the cornerstone of their world. Post Malone, who had once shared a stage with him, wrote simply, "The honor was mine." Rest easy, legend. Iron Maiden, Foo Fighters, members of Judas Priest, each released statements filled with gratitude and disbelief. Sharon shared a black and white photo of Ozzy backstage. He was sitting with his head bowed, hands clasped, almost like in prayer. Her caption read, "He gave you everything, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt." Fans hosted impromptu listening gatherings in parks, bars, churches, alleyways. Anywhere they could turn the volume up just a little louder than usual. In Tokyo, hundreds stood quietly in Yoyogi Park, candles in hand. In Berlin, a church rang its bell 13 times, once for each studio album Ozzy recorded with Black Sabbath. Outside the Osbourne family home in Los Angeles, the street transformed into a river of remembrance. Bouquets of flowers, flags, fan art, tattoo sketches, even snapped guitar necks, all laid out like offerings. An artist painted a massive mural overnight. It showed Ozzy mid-scream with the words, "He screamed so we could be heard." For Sharon, the flood of love was both overwhelming and necessary. Each message, each flower, each tribute. She felt the world helping her carry his memory. In private, she spent late nights reading letters aloud, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, but always holding a photo from 1979, the year she fell in love with the loudest soul she had ever known. Jack, Kelly, and Amy Osbourne also shared tributes, brief but filled with deep emotion. Jack's message read, "He wasn't just my dad. He was the loudest, kindest soul I've ever known. Kelly posted a photo of herself as a baby, wrapped in Ozzy's arms. The caption was simple: "You made the darkness beautiful. I'll carry that forever." The public mourning took on many forms. Churches lit candles. Tattoo shops offered free Ozzy-inspired designs. Mental health forums created threads dedicated to stories of how his music helped people through depression, anxiety, and crushing loneliness. One fan wrote, "I was 14, standing on a ledge, ready to give up. Then I heard Mama, I'm coming home. I stepped back. I chose to stay." Industry leaders moved swiftly to honor his influence. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame announced a retrospective exhibit titled Eternal Prince: The Legacy of Ozzy Osbourne. BBC and ITV scheduled tribute specials to air in primetime. A massive tribute concert at Wembley Stadium entered early planning, with talks of including live feeds from Los Angeles and São Paulo. There were efforts to create something permanent. Birmingham city officials proposed renaming a street or square in his honor. A petition for a posthumous knighthood gathered over 500,000 signatures within 48 hours. Yet even with all the official honors, all the media coverage, the truest tributes came quietly. A woman alone in her car, screaming along to his lyrics. A teenager discovering paranoid for the first time, feeling seen. A nurse humming changes at her patient's bedside. These were the echoes of a man who gave pain a melody, who turned suffering into songs. And that's why his absence feels so heavy. Ozzy didn't just make music history. He lived inside people's lives, in their trauma, in their healing, in their rebellion, in their redemption. He wasn't sanitized. He wasn't safe. He was real. And in a world where authenticity is often staged, Ozzy Osbourne was unfiltered, unshakable, unforgettable. One fan said it best while holding a candle in the dark Birmingham night. "He didn't just teach us how to headbang, he taught us how to hang on." Even in death, Ozzy's voice still speaks, not just through speakers, but through the hearts of millions who found refuge in his chaos. The world mourns, but even more than that, the world remembers, loudly, painfully, and with undying gratitude. In the aftermath of Ozzy Osbourne's death, as millions grieved the loss of a global icon, one woman's sorrow rose above every tribute, every headline, every candlelight vigil. Sharon Osbourne's grief wasn't just public, it was seismic, because she hadn't simply lost a husband. She had lost her mirror, her partner in battle, her anchor in the storm. Their love story had never been polished or perfect, but it was brutally honest, painfully beautiful, and endlessly enduring. Now, without him, Sharon stood at a crossroad between unbearable pain and unshakable purpose. For over 40 years, she wasn't just by Ozzy's side. She was his shield when the world turned away. She held his hand during withdrawals, kept cameras away when he could barely walk, and pushed him back on stage when his spirit still burned, but his body faltered. She knew him better than anyone else ever could. And now, as the world says farewell, it's Sharon who carries the torch. Since his passing, she's kept mostly silent in the public eye, breaking her quiet only once to say, he was surrounded by love. Behind closed doors, those closest to her say she is devastated, and yet somehow she remains composed. Because even in the deepest grief, she is honoring a promise whispered to her in private moments. On nights when Ozzy feared being remembered as myth instead of man, she vowed to protect his truth, and now she's keeping that promise. The first step is already in motion, a memorial event unlike anything the world has seen, a tribute concert at Wembley Stadium being planned under Sharon's direction. But it won't be a funeral. It won't be a show of scripted speeches. It will be loud, electric, and honest, exactly the way Ozzy would have wanted it. Musicians who owe their careers to Ozzfest, artists who still carry his influence in every chord, they'll share the stage in his honor. But Sharon's plans don't end there. Behind the scenes, she's laying the foundation for something far more lasting: the Ozzy Osbourne Legacy Foundation, a mission built on the three causes that defined his final years: mental health advocacy, support for addiction recovery, music education for underprivileged youth. Each reflects a battle Ozzy fought. Each is meant to light a path for someone else lost in the dark. The foundation isn't just a tribute. It's Sharon's way of ensuring that Ozzy continues to save lives, even in death. She's also returning to a personal project, a memoir she started years ago, now reimagined. This won't be a career retrospective. It will focus entirely on the last decade of Ozzy's life, the nights spent in hospitals, the tours that never happened, the quiet exchanges behind closed doors. The book will be honest. It will be painful. It will be hers. Sources close to the family say the manuscript is already more than halfway finished. Sharon, ever meticulous, has kept journals for years. Pages filled with medication notes, late-night fears, and things Ozzy whispered when he thought no one was listening. One entry reportedly reads, "If I can't sing, I'll scream. If I can't scream, I'll whisper. But I won't leave in silence." That's the Ozzy she knew, and that's the Ozzy she wants the world to remember. Alongside the memoir, a documentary is in production. Sharon has opened the family's private archive. Footage, home videos, unseen interviews, even audio recordings. Soon fans may see Ozzy not as the icon, but as the man who danced with Kelly in the kitchen, rehearsed lyrics in his pajamas, and kissed Sharon on the forehead after every fight. This isn't the Prince of Darkness. This is the man who loved fiercely, stumbled publicly, healed quietly, and always came back. Grief hasn't made Sharon smaller. It has made her sharper. She's carving meaning out of loss, building something lasting from the ruins. She's not just preserving what the world saw. She's safeguarding what only she knew. Her strength isn't in hiding the tears. It's in letting them build something honest. "He never wanted a statue," she once said. "He just wanted someone to tell the damn truth." And that truth is this: Ozzy Osbourne was never perfect. He was chaos and compassion, a soul on fire. And she loved every scarred, brilliant part of him. Now, as she meets with publishers, finalizes tribute plans, and builds his foundation, she is doing more than mourning. She is giving him back to the world piece by piece, in the most real and unforgettable way. When the tribute concert lights go dark, when the final page of her book is turned, and when the last frame of footage fades into black, Sharon's work will not be done, because legacies don't end. Not when they've been loved with this kind of fire. Somewhere tonight, a teenager will pick up a guitar because of Ozzy. Elsewhere, someone struggling to stay clean will find hope in his story. And at the heart of it all, a woman in black will sit silently, holding on to the emptiness he left behind, and transforming it into music the world will never forget. From the ashes of rebellion and the roar of distortion, Ozzy Osbourne didn't just claim a place in music, he rewrote what it meant to live unapologetically in the spotlight. In popular culture, few names inspire the kind of devotion, division, and enduring loyalty that Ozzy's does. He wasn't shaped into a star, he shattered the mold. As the frontman of Black Sabbath, he helped give birth to heavy metal, not just as a sound, but as a cultural force. Their 1970 debut didn't charm critics, but fans knew. Songs like War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man weren't just tracks. They were anthems for a generation drowning in war, corruption, and conformity. And Ozzy, with that ragged voice and dangerous energy, became their prophet. He made imperfection powerful. He made chaos sacred. But his reach didn't end with music. Across 5 decades, he seeped into film, fashion, TV, even academia. He was studied, mocked, honored, and mimicked, but never replaced. The nickname Prince of Darkness wasn't just marketing, it was recognition. He had become the voice for those who felt invisible. His songs didn't just echo rage, they offered communion. And that's why his death wasn't just a loss to rock, it was a reckoning. Vigils formed not just in Birmingham, but in Tokyo, Berlin, São Paulo, Los Angeles. People weren't just mourning a musician, they were mourning a belief system, a bond, a shared code. In Hollywood, black roses and tear-streaked letters surrounded his star. In the UK, digital billboards faded to black, displaying only his silhouette in 2 words: "Thank you." Back in Birmingham, the city that first heard him scream into a microphone, plans are underway for a permanent monument. A public square may soon bear his name, Ozzy Yard. One council member called him Birmingham's most fearless and global voice. And at Wembley Stadium, musicians from across genres will unite for a once-in-a-lifetime tribute. Some opened for him decades ago, others grew up on his records. They'll meet under one sky. for one purpose: to say goodbye. But the most powerful tribute came from the people. Within 48 hours, a petition for a posthumous knighthood reached over 500,000 names. Ozzy was never knighted while alive, but supporters argue his influence on British music is unmatched. That honoring him now is not sentiment, it's justice. Even the UK's Department for Culture responded, acknowledging Ozzy's role in launching British music onto the world stage. Broadcast networks followed suit. BBC announced a two-part primetime special. ITV ran a 24-hour marathon of past performances and interviews. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland is dedicating a new space to him, featuring handwritten lyrics, stage gear, and rare footage. And now scholars are taking a second look. Universities in both Britain and America are launching courses on his life and lyrics, and the psychological impact of heavy metal in post-industrial society. To many, Ozzy wasn't just an artist. He was a translator of pain. He turned alienation into art, rage into rhythm, and despair into connection. Strip away the headlines, the scandals, the chaos. What remains is a man whose humanity changed the world. His legacy isn't confined to gold records. It lives in the language of survival, in the soundtrack of those who found themselves inside his roar. Ozzy didn't just belong to music, he belonged to history, and history doesn't forget. Even after the final bow, his spirit echoes across time. His departure wasn't an ending, it was an entrance into legend, where sound needs no amplifier to be heard, and legacy needs no breath to stay alive. Because something happened in the days after his death, not just grief, but reflection. Ozzy didn't simply make music, he made survival louder. He wore his flaws like armor. He turned pain into proof. Generations of fans, from teens behind bedroom doors to worn-down veterans of life, found in him something they never saw in anyone else. Permission to be imperfect, to be loud, to be broken and still worthy of love. His legacy isn't sealed in platinum, it's etched into hearts. And those who followed, bands like Ghost, Slipknot, Avenged Sevenfold, Bring Me the Horizon, they don't just cite him as influence, they carry his rebellion in their DNA. Ozzy's mix of madness and meaning became the benchmark of authenticity, but no one has recreated it, because Ozzy was not a formula. He was a storm, a prophet for the outcasts. A single quote now circles murals and memorials. He didn't just leave behind music, he left behind a way to live. Be loud, be broken, be fearless, be you. That wasn't just a farewell, it was a battle cry. He showed us that vulnerability isn't weakness, that madness isn't failure, that music isn't decoration, it is survival, it is rebellion, it is love. Even when his body trembled, even when the pain deepened, his voice never lost its bite. He once said, "If I die on stage, let it be because I was doing the only thing I've ever truly loved." And though his last performance came months before his final breath, in spirit, he died doing exactly that, giving everything, holding nothing back. Today, universities teach his life. Therapists quote his lyrics. Families still play Paranoid at dinner. What makes his legacy eternal isn't what he achieved. It's what he gave to the broken. He didn't promise perfection, he offered truth. He taught the world how to scream, how to rise again, how to love without shame. He didn't just build metal, he gave it a soul. And now that soul shelters every voice still trembling, every heart still daring to sing. As long as there are people choosing honesty over polish, spirit over spectacle, and fire over fear, Ozzy Osbourne will never fade. His voice will echo in every whisper of defiance, every chorus of healing, every anthem that refuses to die quietly. So the final note is not silence, it is legacy, undeniable, uncompromising, unforgettable. And if Ozzy was the fire, then Sharon was the flame. For more than 4 decades, she stood not in his spotlight, but in his shadow, through the chaos, through the pain. She wasn't just his wife, she was his fiercest protector, the one who carried him when he could no longer carry himself. And now in the quiet left behind, she holds the weight of his memory, not with noise, but with devotion, not with myth, but with truth. Every tribute planned, every foundation built, every story told, bears her mark. Ozzy may have been the Prince of Darkness, but Sharon, she was his light.